You're listening to a Thames Estuary Partnership podcast, celebrating London's famous tidal river. We hope you enjoy it.
Hello, my name is Eve Sanders and welcome back to Talk of the Thames. Now, you may have heard about the recent dog attack on Freddie the seal, which happened towards Hammersmith Bridge. It got a lot of media coverage and was a truly tragic event. In response to this, we thought we would focus today's episode on these beautiful creatures, seals. I have been lucky enough to see one of these lovely animals during a boat trip down the Tidal Thames a couple of years ago. We think it was a harbour seal, and you can tell the difference because the grey seals have the longer faces, the small kind of Roman-looking faces, and it's such a great feeling when you see the head pop above the water. But to find out more about seal populations and the surveys happening in the Thames, I spoke to Alison Debney from the Zoological Society of London. Alison, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Eve. I think that's going to take part in this podcast.
Good. So, I mean, we're keen to learn more about seals in the Thames. And I mean, I think a lot of people know we've got the grey seals and the harbour seals or the common seals. What species of seal do we mostly get in the Thames?
Well, you've got the two that we have in our waters. Actually, the number, us knowing the numbers has come about from a gap in information that the Thames Estuary Partnership identified almost 15 years ago. So that set us on the quest to actually understand how many seals we had in the Thames and where they lived and where the priority areas or the important habitats were for them. So as you're right, we have harbour seals, and there are about 900 harbour seals living in the estuary at the moment. But we also have grey seals, and we have about 3,500 of them. We've got more than we ever had previously. Trends have been increasing, certainly have gone up nearly 50%. The harbour seals have gone up 50% since we started looking for them properly back in 2013, or counting them properly anyway. And also, we've seen year-on-year increase in grey seals as well.
Amazing. That's really good. And is the increase in numbers, I'm guessing, due to the increase of the health of the Thames?
Well, I know they're going to give a real scientist answer now, that we haven't got the evidence and we don't totally understand why we're seeing the increase, or we can't, align a specific reason why, because we haven't got the population numbers pre-2013 or so. What we do know is in the early 1990s, there was a massive decrease in numbers. The harbour seal particularly suffered from phocine distemper, so it's a virus that went round and really knocked the number of seals or harbour seals down to low levels. So we had two outbreaks of this disease, and since then, since it's gone, we're beginning to see numbers increase. So actually where we are now is where we were perhaps in the 1990s with numbers. So we're not sure whether we're plateauing or what we're likely to see, but that's why we try and do year-on-year trends, just to A, keep an eye out whether there's going to be any more disease outbreaks and see the impact, and B, sort of to see where we're going. Interesting, we look around shifting numbers or shifting patterns in seal populations around the east coast of England as well. And whilst some seal populations, such as up at the Wash, they've already plateaued and not seen increases for the last 10 years, we have been seeing year-on-year increases in numbers of harbour and seals continue down in the Greater Thames Estuary.
Wow. Okay, so that's really interesting. I didn't know that there was a disease that was a real killer, and that affected both species, did it?
Primarily harbour seal.
Primarily. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. So that kind of naturally subsided, but then there's a possibility that could return.
Yeah, my colleagues at the Institute of Zoology and up at St Andrews are always keeping their eye out, because they think it's it's a reality that it's likely to come again at some point. And I guess, going back to why you're saying about the Thames being a healthy environment, and that's why we've seen the increased populations, that might not be the reason per se, but by having a healthy ecosystem with plentiful food and, good haul-out sites, that gives, it gives a sound habitat that seals can withstand, knocks such as disease or other, crises that happen to them, because they've got that security of food supply and haul out or pupping areas.
So it definitely helps to have that kind of suitable environment. But what's special about the Thames to have seals? Why is it a good habitat for seals?
I'm now going to counteract what I've just said because it is a healthy ecosystem. Estuaries are hugely productive areas. You've got the freshwater coming to meet the marine and lots of nutrients, and those nutrients means there are fish that feed on the phytoplankton, the zooplankton, and those fish get eaten by bigger fish, and ultimately at the top you've got the top predators, which are the seals and harbour seals and greys that come in and will feed on those fish. So it's exciting when we see seals coming into the outer estuary. They're following the sprat and herring populations that are good food supply, but also support the North Sea fishery, and it shows that we have got wildlife and good food sources in the Thames for them to eat. In some ways, it's funny. We always have the debate at ZSL about, is it a conservation project? But actually, it's not so per se. But we see it as, us understanding the ecology and biology of seals is incredibly important, because it's a showcase species that we can talk about the Thames and the Thames environment, and exactly what I was just saying about the food chain from the nutrients through to the top predators. Having some of these top predators and the big wildlife in the centre of London is exciting, but it's also unusual. So I think we'll all have to learn behaviours so that we can coexist happily.
Definitely. So what kind of surveys are ZSL doing to monitor the populations of seals?
Okay, so each year, we've got 3 different types of surveys going on. We have a marine mammal sightings app, which we really appreciate and encourage people to send us any sightings of seals and other marine mammals into us, and that just enables us to keep track on where are the hotspots that people are seeing the animals, and give us what does give us a bit of a trend over time about how that changes. The thing about that project, whilst it's really helpful and we get some amazing images and stories about it, it's quite effort-based, which basically means if there's more people standing on Westminster Bridge seeing a seal, we'll get 5 sightings, whereas if there's no one up in the outer estuary seeing it, we won't get any sightings. So it doesn't give us a true population level or population numbers. So to marry that and to counteract that, we undertake annual population surveys each year. So we do that through by aeroplane, so it's very exciting getting up, and big camera and GPSs, and we take off and we'll survey all of the outer Thames as much as we can, coming in before getting mixed up with Heathrow, but out in the outer sandbanks, up to Harwich and down to Gravesend, out into the Kentish Flats, the Goodwin Sands, and so we will count the number of seals we see hauled out on the sandbanks at low tide, and we do it in the July, beginnings of August, when the seals molt. So this is when they're likely to haul out for longer, because they don't have the warm fur to keep them warm in the water. And the last, we've done it twice already. Obviously, last year scuppered everything for everyone with COVID, but we also started to do pup counts for harbour seals, to try and understand if the Thames is a site for breeding, a breeding colony for harbour seals, to understand pup numbers, and that also then feeds into the population dynamics of understanding the stability of populations. So we've done that twice, and we've identified sort of key pupping areas for harbour seals, which is very exciting as well.
Very exciting, yeah. And I mean, once you've got those areas mapped, presumably that sort of goes with interpretation for the public, or do you...
a lot of the sites are offshore. Goodwin.
Okay, yeah.
But the data are very much being used. I mean, I know Essex Wildlife Trust really appreciate it and understand and use it, and maybe in their interpretation. And it's always a very good talking point, so that we can explain and things. And also, there's I think there's a few seal sighting operators and tours, and so they really enjoy. We work closely with them as well to share the numbers and good practice and behaviours around seal populations as well.
Definitely. So for if someone's listening and they're really keen to help or get involved, is there a way that they can do that, perhaps with the citizen science surveys you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, well, I mean, we always just say keep your eyes out, and if you're walking along the river or over the bridge going to a meeting, keep your eyes peeled and look in the river, because it's all invaluable information, and it really documents change over time. If we can see change over time, we really understand much better the ecology and need and how to manage our estuaries. An example of that, we've not done the proper analysis yet, but I just had a quick look at our seal sighting maps and upstream of Putney, because this year we seem to have had a lot of sightings of seals, harbour seals and grey seal, and interestingly a grey seal upstream of Putney. And just drawing out some of the numbers, which we will write up properly, back in 2016 we had 290 sightings upstream of Putney, but this year we had 585 sightings, so that's almost doubled. But just going back to what I was saying, sometimes that's effort-based. So, everyone might have congregated around Teddington or Isleworth or Putney because they knew certain seals were there. So then you get more sightings. So what we need to draw out is, are there more seals coming up the estuary and up the river through central London, or are just more people out in the river and enjoying it and appreciating nature and interacting with nature?
Yeah. And I guess that's particularly so for last year when, green space was valued so much, after we'd all been in lockdown. So I guess, more people are out walking next to the river, which could, correspond with more sightings.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it. But yeah, as I was saying, that's great. It shows that more people are having that connectivity with nature. And I guess alongside that comes the responsibility that we need to learn how to behave around wild animals as well.
Definitely. So there's a code of conduct that you've developed alongside some partners. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we developed this a few years ago with the Port of London Authority, the Met Police or the River Police, BDMLR, and so forth. And basically, it's a code of conduct about what to do if you see a seal or a marine mammal in the Thames. Whether to see whether the animal's in distress or whether it's just inquisitive and enjoying the river and come up to sea and just sort of having a nice time hauled out on the side of the river. So that's on our websites, and it should be on our partner's website as well. But there is a phone number on it that whether to call if you're concerned about whether a seal's distressed or whether it's happy or not. And certainly that will trigger action, such as the Port of London Authority. The guys on the boats can come down and have a look and make a call whether they need to take further action or not. It's quite normal for seals to come up the Thames and haul out and rest and enjoy the sunshine and bask. So I think we need to accept that and realize they're not in trouble and it is a normal behavior. But we also need to recognize that they are wild animals, so we need to allow them not to get stressed and let them enjoy doing that and perhaps perform their natural behaviors. And so we always advocate and request that people keep their dogs on leads or keep their distance so that it doesn't traumatize or stress the animals out.
Is there a particular trend that the data that ZSL have collected is starting to show?
Well, I think it's great. We're seeing the increase in numbers throughout the estuary, from the Outer Banks through to central London. A trend I can really see happening, which is very encouraging to me, is that we're also seeing a response from the public, and for them to accept and understand and really value that seals are an important part of the ecology of the Thames, and that it's right and normal that we should see them. So I think that's amazing, and anything like that will get people's focus on the Thames so that we can continue to drive improvements to it. A reaction again from the public in central London is that they'll see seas on one day, and yet they'll see this combined sewage outfalls pumping sewage the other day, and so they're putting the two together, saying, look, hey, this is not right, seeing the pollution, how's it going to affect the seal? And then you start thinking, well, then you can have the dialogue about, this is our top predator, we've done well with the Thames, it's got fish, they're encouraging, but we've still got a long way to go. So it becomes that global exemplar of an estuarine system that we so want. We're still very much trying to understand how seals use it, and this year actually there is another citizen science or app that we'd really encourage people to try and use. It's called our Instant Wild, And we've got some camera traps out in the outer estuaries up in Hamford Water in Essex,
Cool.
from where people can go unless they're on a boat. But we're trying to understand seasonal trends in seals and how they use the haul out sites. Because we do a snapshot, as I was saying, once a year. But we've had cameras going on for a number of years now, 2 or 3, really looking at through winter, through summer, how seals use the haul out sites. And what we've found really interesting is that it's not just low water that they do it when it's muddy, but seals use them all through the tidal cycle, whether it's feeding or foraging. But also there are seasonal changes in some of the haul out. So like in winter when perhaps winter they seem to use them more. That's right. Perhaps it's changes to do when there's an easterly wind, they'll come in and use the sandbanks as protection against some of the storms. And then in summer, when maybe the winds are calmer, they're either further out, or perhaps we don't know again, but maybe it is perhaps that they get disturbed by boats, so then they're not hauling out anymore. But that's research could do. So it's the Wild app. You can find it on the ZSL website, and it's real time. And what it does is you do a count of how many seals you see, and it's over time. So we really get to understand how many, what's happening. And it's great. We've had like over 10,000 users, and each photograph needs 10 verifiers. So we've had like over 100,000 interactions on that. And I think people quite enjoy it. I encourage everyone to keep an eye out and see if you can see them. Send your sightings in, have a go at the Instant Wild app, and enjoying seeing nature in London.
Well, it was really great to speak to Alison and to find out about the citizen science initiatives based on seals happening around the Thames. I'm definitely going to get involved if I spot one, if I'm lucky enough to spot one. To find out more about the curious ways of seals, though, I went and spoke to Paul Hyman, owner of the Thames-based paddleboarding company Active 360. Paul has had some very close encounters with seals. He's also based in an office underneath Kew Bridge, so we do apologise for any background noise. Hi, Paul. Thank you so much for being here today. How long have you been paddleboarding along the Thames for?
Started in 2011, and before that I was a kayaker on the Thames, and that started back in the 90s. So I've actually been involved in canoeing, kayaking since I was a teenager. And then the 360 came along later when I suppose I was getting a bit fed up with kayaking apart from whitewater. And this seemed like a really nice, interesting thing to get into, and something that I thought could really take off in London as a way of introducing more people to the river. The sport's growing everywhere, so we're lucky we got in at a relatively early stage when not much was happening. Certainly not much happening in London.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've done a bit of paddleboarding, but not in London. I'm keen to give it a go, actually. I just think it's a really relaxing thing to do and a really good way to see wildlife as well.
Definitely. It's the best way to see the river.
Yeah.
You're standing up, so you see more than if you're sat down in a boat.
Tell me about some of your favourite encounters with seals.
Well, we didn't see many seals until about 4 or 5 years ago. Quite a rare sight. And then the first encounter that I remember where a seal tried to climb on a board was my son Sam and a friend were out on the river. I think this was at least 4 years ago at Christmas, and a seal tried to climb on the board, and they filmed it and came back very excited. And I didn't really encounter a seal trying to climb on a board or get very close until a bit later, maybe about a year after that. And I had some people out on the river cleaning up some plastic with an organisation involved in wildlife, and a seal just popped up and tried to climb on our boards, and it was the first time that happened. So I'd seen seals many times in other places, like in the Hebrides, on the islands, and in Greenland, and I'd seen them around the south coast and places like Cornwall.
Yeah.
And I'd even swam with them in Wales, scuba diving.
Oh,
but
amazing.
I'd never seen a seal really, really up close in the Thames. But that was the first one. And then we started getting other encounters. I had one about 6 months, a year later. And again, trying to climb on the boards, generally quite playful. And then there was one that I missed last year. I wasn't involved in it, but one of our coaches and one of our regular paddlers was out there, and a seal actually did climb on their paddleboards and stayed on for a while and stayed around, and then tried to climb on. I actually did climb onto a sculling boat. So, and that was quite a long encounter.
It must be very exciting when to get to see one, so close up. It just must be such a thrill to see one like that.
Yeah, it is. There's, when you have winter encounters, there's half of you thinking, actually, I really don't want to fall in the river, and this seal is heavy, and it's going to get on my board and unbalance me. So there's a sort of slight, but then there's the fascination and the side of you that says, well, I don't really care. I don't mind if you get wet because this is so good.
Yeah.
I'm really glad it's happening. So
yeah. Amazing. And I guess those, like you said, those encounters are probably going to get more common in the future because of their numbers increasing. I
think so. And I think we just have to be really careful how we deal with them. We certainly shouldn't be encouraging them. They have to be on the seals' terms. I hope it is a fairly rare thing, because I think if it happens regularly, that at some point a seal will get hurt because someone will be afraid and panic. And I think that's why I wouldn't ever encourage that behaviour. Yeah. So I think as long as it happens as it is, it's just one of those fairly rare things that we encounter, then that's fine. I think the seals won't come to any harm, but obviously if it starts becoming very frequent and people are encouraging them, perhaps with food, then I think that could be bad.
If people are interested in seals and they want to get a better or a more up-close look at a seal, how can they do that responsibly through a company such as yours, Active 360?
I think it's just going out regularly, and it just happens because they're out there. There's no way of sort of hunting them down, going to places where you expect them, because they pop up unexpectedly anywhere along the river. They've obviously they're good swimmers. They have a huge range. So if you see a seal in Hammersmith one day, you're more likely to see it at Kew Bridge the next day. It's not necessarily going to hang around in Hammersmith. So, I don't think there's any way you can set out to seal them, but just by being out on the river regularly, you will encounter them. Yeah. All of our coaches have seen seals now numerous times.
And do you recognise any characters? Are there any that you've sort of got to know?
Definitely the pup that climbed on the board last year. We saw that one around a few times, but then we saw a much larger seal a few weeks after that. So it's really hard to recognise them except by photographs. When we sort of compare photographs, we can work out whether it was the same seal or not. It's hard unless you study a photograph or two photographs taken at different times. You might recognise that it's the same seal repeating. One thing we do natural history tours on the Thames. That's quite a good way of seeing wildlife generally, because you go out looking for wildlife, and if you're more aware and looking around, then I think there's a higher probability of encountering and seeing seals than if you're just out there casually paddling around, where you sometimes miss things. You just because a seal can just pop up over the other side of the river and it might not go anywhere near us, and you can completely miss that if you're not scanning the river.
If people want to join you on a natural history tour, how's the best way for them to go about that?
They can just book them on our website. We put them on fairly regularly now. They're interesting because they're something we developed because we wanted people to have the opportunity, if they wanted, to understand more about the river, how it's changed in terms of water quality, pollution levels, than the amount of wildlife now compared with, say, 40 or 50 years ago, which is an incredibly different river than it was when it was a dead river in the 50s and 60s. and recovering in the 70s and 80s very slowly. And now you have this very live river with full of fish and full of predators looking for the fish. So a great situation to be in once again.
Definitely. And that's kind of got me wondering, because you're the best person to see the wildlife, really. If you're out and about on the river, you've got the highest chance of seeing all this amazing wildlife. But within your time paddling on the river, have you noticed an increase in the wildlife that you've seen?
The first time that I remember really noticing how many fish in the river, it was probably about 2004, and there was a big fish kill that year. It was a very warm summer, and the river was on a very low level. The river got polluted by some flash flooding. It was a big storm, and a lot of sewage washed into the river, and there were dead fish being found all along the river. Thousands and thousands of dead fish, big fish, a lot of them. And that was when we really realized how healthy the river was. It took a pollution incident like that to really wake us up to, we'd been seeing fish for some time, but suddenly realized the number of fish in there. And of course, the river recovered from that fairly rapidly. A few years later, it was probably back to good levels again. Yes, it has improved. I mean, I've lived on the river since the 80s, most of the time. So in the 80s, the first salmon were back in the river. I think it was a turning point where the river was actually said to be more healthy. But it was probably late 90s before it was really up to a good level that it is now. And it's been recovering slowly since that. Now there's plastic pollution, which is the new problem with the river, which is really growing.
To dive a bit deeper into the dog attack which happened on the Thames foreshore, I'm now joined by Mary Tester. Mary was the marine medic from the British Divers Marine Life Rescue who responded to the call saying that a seal had been attacked by a dog. Hi, Mary. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. How are you today?
I'm really excited to be here and talking to you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
No, you're welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. It's going to be a really interesting episode, I think, and it's such a hot topic, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah, it's really needed. I'm really grateful that so many people are willing to talk about this because public awareness is crucial, especially at the moment.
Definitely. So before we get started, I'm just going to make a confession and say that the acronym for the British Divers Marine Life Rescue is quite a mouthful. So we're going to be referring to it as British Divers, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I struggle with it myself. Don't worry.
Okay. So Mary, what do you do for British Divers?
So I am a volunteer marine mammal medic. So basically, if there's any injured animals that require either rescue or maybe a situation that requires monitoring that's within the Thames, then my job is to go out and kind of check it out and report back. And if it looks like it's something that requires a rescue, then we kind of coordinate the team to come out and take care of that issue. I moved here from California, where I was working with seals and tracking whales with the American Cetacean Society and all of that good stuff. So I came here not really expecting to see much action. My territory with British Divers is the Thames. And even though there are seals and there is the occasional porpoise, there's not really many rescues that are needed. Ironically, Freddie was my first.
The recent events on, I think it was by Hammersmith Bridge, was it not?
Yeah, so it was between Hammersmith and Barnes. It was on the St. Paul's rowing ramp.
Okay, yeah. And people may have seen this in news about Freddie the seal who was attacked by a dog. So Mary, what happened there?
It's very, very sad. So Freddie got a lot of press for many reasons, obviously, because he's a seal and he's adorable and he's in the Thames and he's coming up in a place that's very close to humans. So you can actually get a very close look at him, and people were curious, and it was very close to the path right there by the Thames. And he was on ITV. They did a little segment about him, which also drew a lot of attention, and people wanted to go and see him. And so ropes were put up, cones were put up, signs were put up to kind of tell people where to stand and instruct them on what the appropriate distance was. And eventually, I would say most people were listening to those signs. There were the rare few that kind of decided to do their own thing. Occasionally the ropes would get taken down because St. Paul's needed to use the ramp, obviously, and not necessarily get put back up. And so the cones were there with signs, but it made it easier for people to kind of go down a little further and get those selfies or those photos, or for dogs to go down there, people walking along the path and not putting their dogs on lead soon enough, and the dogs would go down and have a sniff. People don't really know what I look like. They may have heard my name, but I have a kind of a sense of anonymity, which is great, because what I would do is I would go and monitor him every single day, and I would check on him and see if he's eating. And I have over 800 photographs of him, and kind of check his weight, make sure his skin looks okay, eyes look okay, etc. All the normal things that we look for as medics to check health. But I would also stay there longer than I needed to just kind of observe people and how they acted towards him. And it was interesting because every single time that I was there, no matter the day, no matter the time, there was always a moment when I had to ask someone to step back or to please put their dog on a lead.
Yeah.
There was even a moment when a woman was throwing a stick into the water when he was like 30 feet away from her. And she was trying to encourage the dog to go play fetch in the water close to Freddie. And the dog didn't want to go, which was ironic. And I had to go down and ask her, I said, there's a seal here. And she said, oh, I know. I said, no, you can't. I'm sorry, you can't do this. And she's like, oh, okay. It was pretty shocking. Even while we were rescuing him, there was people who had dogs off lead running around. I just don't think that it's necessarily common knowledge for how to behave around seals, and why it can be dangerous both for people and for animals and for the seal when distance isn't at play in those situations. I mean, I think we know that now, but unfortunately what happened to Freddie happens regularly around the UK, which I'm not sure if people know about.
It's really, I mean, it was such a tragic event and horrible to think that happened. But I guess from this we have almost learned that the need for interpretation and the need for people to be educated around how to respect these animals, because their numbers are increasing, aren't they?
They are increasing, and as a result, their interaction with the public is increasing as well. And as far as in the Thames goes, I mean, we've seen an increase in sightings in the past 3 years. Before coronavirus, there has been a jump in sightings. And I think it just goes to show, how healthy the river is. It's a great sign, really, that the livability of the Thames has increased. And I think that will continue to increase with the completion of the Thames Tideway. You have over 4,000 seals that are down by the estuary. Their curiosity to swim further upstream when it's nice and peaceful and there's plenty of food seems pretty logical.
What do you think needs to happen to make it more general knowledge about how we should respond and act around seals along the Thames?
Well, I think exactly what we're doing right now. I mean, any sort of press or discussion, just to have those discussions on any sort of broad platform as possible is really crucial. So press, I think signs are a good way to do that, whether it's permanent signs along the river or even temporary signs is something that I've been looking into, where it might be the case to have something that maybe someone who lives on a houseboat or who is regularly on the water in an area where there are seals has a temporary sign that they can put out in an area where they have seen a seal hauling out that is close to where the public could, interact with that. Something along the lines that says, there's a seal that has been spotted here. Please put your dog on lead for the next 100 meters, or whatever the case may be. I just don't know how common knowledge it is that there's so much life in the river at the moment. And I think with Freddie, at first, people's reaction to him was that, oh no, something's wrong. Why is there a seal here? What's wrong with him? He needs food. We need to feed him. Somebody actually tried to feed him. And that's not the case at all. It's very much alive and thriving. And it's important that we A, know what's in there, B, know how to act around it, and what that means. So I think it's just these conversations that we're having right now.
You're saying that there's a real misunderstanding about life in the Thames, and one of the main themes that gets mentioned throughout these podcast episodes is that people still view the Thames as dirty and devoid of life, but actually that's not true anymore. It's thriving, really.
Really
and
is.
It's only getting better as well, looking into the touch wood, looking into the future. So naturally we're going to see more wildlife as a result of that. So that this sighting of the seal wasn't some kind of anomaly, was it?
Well, he was special in the sense that he came so close to people and didn't seem bothered by us. And I think that was largely to do with the fact that he had already been previously rescued and rehabilitated since a young pup. So I think that he kind of saw humans as creatures that would protect him, really, which is kind of sad to think about now. So I think that's why he wasn't afraid to keep coming back to a heavily populated area. I don't think that that's normal behavior for other seals. I think they tend to stay away and kind of do their own thing and try to be as private as possible. But it's definitely important to know that if that's not the case, and one tends to haul out in a place that's easily accessible to people, like maybe Strand on the Green or something similar, then we need to know how to behave and not to behave around them. Since Freddie's death, I realized that there's a lot of sightings that have kind of gone under the radar. I had been speaking to people who live and work along the river, and the stuff that they were telling me, how often they see them, about seals jumping up on paddle boards, which is a new and still rare occurrence, but it has happened, and they've apparently been trying to do that since 2017. That's really useful information. And so when I talked to a lot of these people, not everyone knew about the ZSL sightings map, which I think is absolutely crucial to know about, because all of that information is great for scientists and people leading the conservation projects and medics such as myself, and even public awareness to know how many seals are in the Thames at a time. And so basically I kind of put together a team of people who are constantly on the water. They're the eyes and the ears of the water. And together we are trying to increase public awareness and increase sightings or mappings of sightings that we see in animal behavior, such as trying to jump on paddle boards or what types of fish they're eating, etc. Because I think at the moment there's a lot of information about populations and sightings in the Thames estuary, but now they're becoming increasingly more popular further upstream in West Thames. So there seems to be a niche little market there for trying to create a team of people to help with sightings up here.
And I mean, one of the things that you're sort of working towards to better protect these seals, if I'm right, you've started a campaign to strengthen the laws around seals protection.
Yeah. So I realized after Freddie's attack that as many laws as there are to quote unquote protect seals, there's not really anything that specifically protected Freddie from what happened on that Sunday. And so, me being the person that I am, I said, well, this can't stand. We have to change that. So I've reached out to some people. I had some meetings with DEFRA. I'm very lucky that Lord Zach Goldsmith supported me heavily with this. And very thankful to MP Tracy Crouch, who agreed to sponsor a parliamentary motion to help further protect seals in the Thames. And that motion was put forward about 3 days ago. So we now have 5
Brilliant.
MPs that have signed it, but we need hundreds of MPs to sign it in order to take it to the next level. And so I'm asking people to reach out to their local MPs and to ask them to sign EDM 1707. And also, I've started a government petition. I'm just awaiting approval of that for it to go live. So that's another way to go about getting Parliament to debate this issue. So if we get 10,000 people to sign that, then Parliament has to respond. And if we get 100,000 people, then we're guaranteed a parliamentary debate, which is the goal. So we need hundreds of MPs and we need 100,000 people to sign this government petition.
So a cheeky call out there.
Yes, please, everybody.
No, but good luck to you with that campaign. I mean, what I'm really interested to know is how does the protection of seals, within the UK, how does that compare to other countries?
Well, I can only speak for the US. It is very, very different. So I'll speak in regards to California because that's where I came from and that's what I know about. So there is already a law where it prevents dogs from being off lead unless you are in specific areas like a dog park or a dog friendly beach. Otherwise, there's a hefty fine of like $1,100. And then in regards to marine mammal protection, Richard Nixon passed that act in 1972, which is basically full protection against harassment, injury, touching, feeding, pretty much the same protection as the deer in Richmond Park. And that has a very hefty penalty of an upwards of $28,500 and up to a year in prison. So, we're talking about stuff from 1972. It has become very common knowledge now. So you don't see things like this happening very often. Occasionally you will get an angry fisherman who injures a seal or something, but it's nothing to the same degree as it is here in the UK. Which I was actually pretty shocked about because the UK is known for being just environmentally friendly and, loving wildlife and protecting wildlife. I think there just seems to be a gap in legislation that maybe was overlooked or potentially because the situation has changed now. There's more seals and there's more human and seal interaction, and therefore there's more seal and pet interaction. And so there just needs to be some amendments made there.
Absolutely. I mean, it's quite interesting to learn that, like you said, maybe that's a real gap in legislation, that seals don't have the protection that they need and probably increasingly need as well.
Yeah, I agree. And, especially in regards, I know we've talked a lot about the Thames, but in other parts of the UK, there are significant things that are happening in regards to human and seal interaction. You have these rocky beaches where there's hundreds of seals that are hauled out. And if a person tries to go too close, all it takes is just one of those seals to, announce that there's a threat and head for the hills. And then all of them just rush to try to get into the water. And in doing so, they impale themselves on these rocks and break their jaws. And it's very, very bloody. And it's absolutely traumatizing and totally preventable, and, in places where there's pups on the beach, there have been instances where people have gone to touch those pups. And unfortunately, what happens in those cases is it breaks the maternal bond and the mother will no longer feed that pup and it starves. So it's all very unfortunate and again, easily preventable.
Yeah, that is. I mean, it's really upsetting to hear that. But these laws that you're trying to, this campaign that you're working on, that will hopefully result in change for the whole of the UK.
I mean, that would be the end goal. That would be absolutely terrific, wouldn't it?
Brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because really, as great as it would be to protect the seals in the Thames, seals in the rest of the UK and they need this even more, really. Yeah. There's more incidents where this is occurring, whether it's harassment from people or, whether it's attacks from dogs, etc. So, I mean, if a law is going to be made, and we have such a large platform to speak about all of this at the moment, the moment is now, really. If something's going to happen, it's going to happen now. And I just really, really hope that we can get enough people behind this to make some serious changes, because it needs to be done. Whales and dolphins are protected under the Crown. You have deer and swans that are protected, and it only makes sense that seals are on that same playing field.
So this dog attack happened in the Thames, and it had, a lot of media coverage. Yeah. Is this something that happens a lot around the UK and it just hasn't been picked up on before? Or why did Freddie gather so much attention?
So there was opportunity to see him and to talk about him all the time. And then the fact that he was so close to the path, that meant that not only he was close to people, but he was close to dogs. But yes, this sort of stuff does happen regularly across the UK with beaches, people who have their dogs on beaches and they run up to seals and attack them. I've seen some really, really gruesome photos of instances where that has happened. And it doesn't get the press. And it's because it's just one of the many seals that are on that beach versus Freddie Mercury, who had a name, who had a cute face, who was on his own and everybody fell in love with. So he's kind of become the voice for all of those other guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it would be really nice to kind of prevent other seals who don't have that fame from suffering the same fate.
The Thames Path it attracts a huge amount of visitors, but particularly during the moment where people have to stick to their local patch. So if you come across a seal, what is the best practice? I mean, how should you react in a way that's going to respect the seal, but perhaps is there something people can do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing is don't panic. It's a really good sign that the Thames is doing really, really well. It's okay that they're in the Thames. So not every sighting of a seal means that there needs to be a seal rescue. The chances are is that they're actually healthy and doing very, very well. So if you see a sighting and it's just a seal swimming around or maybe sunbathing and they look all right, then the best thing to do is to report that sighting to ZSL. And that is useful for the scientists, for those leading conservation projects, medics such as myself, and just general public awareness to know that they're around. And if the seal does seem to be injured, like in the example of when Freddie had the hook stuck in his mouth in Teddington, where something very obvious, or they look unwell, or if you're unsure, if something just doesn't seem right, you're not 100% sure, call the British Divers Marine Life Rescue. We'll go and have a look at it, examine it, see if it's okay. Another reason to call right away is if it's a pup on its own. You can tell if it's a pup. A lot of people thought that Freddie was a pup. He was coming up on a year old, so he was not entirely a pup. But they are between 65 to 100 centimeters. Compared to adults, which are 1.3 to 1.9 meters. And then the adults are 60 to 150 kg versus the pups, which are 8 to 12 kg. So you can kind of see the size difference there. They tend to be a little bit fluffier as well. Some of them, depending, if they're newborn, if they're 3 weeks old, then they tend to have really fluffy coats. Sometimes they're white, fluffy coats, which they will molt after the 3-week time period. And then unfortunately, if you see a dead seal, then you should call CSIP, which is the Cetacean Strandings Investigation Program. And they will come and remove the animal and do a thorough investigation as to the cause of the death. The other thing I was going to mention, if you see a seal in the Thames, is obviously put your dog on the lead right away.
Yeah.
And do keep your distance. They do bite. They can bite. The people who were involved in Freddie's rescue, 2 of them were bitten by him and had to go to hospital to receive treatment. When we worked with seals in California, we used to wear welding gloves.
Oh, really?
The reason is because A, they bite really hard. Sometimes it takes 2 people to get them off of you if they don't feel like letting go. But B, they also have this mycoplasma bacteria that lives in their mouths that can cause something called seal finger, which in the first half of the 20th century was a pretty common thing among fishermen. And before they had tetracycline to clear that up, they would have to amputate their finger. So
Oh,
it's
goodness. Okay.
it doesn't always happen, but it can happen.
Yeah.
And they can also contain parasites, which are zoonotic, and so that means that humans and their pets could potentially get that. So all the more reason to keep your distance, not just because you're disturbing them, but because it's dangerous potentially.
Yeah. And they're large. They're quite large and powerful animals. They need the respect, don't they?
They do. They're very big. They're very strong. So I wouldn't mess with them in the wild, unless of course I'm doing a rescue and there's multiple people helping me. So I wouldn't suggest that other people try to approach them either. I know we talk a lot about keeping distance and the reason for keeping the distance, which is disturbance and because of potential injury to yourself or to the seal. But I think it's really also important to understand why beyond that. So, seals already face a multitude of threats, whether it's overfishing and habitat degradation, which is the suspected reason why common seals have declined by almost 40% in Scotland, or whether it's chemical pollution like PCBs that build up in their bodies because they can't remove them. And once that buildup occurs, then it causes immunosuppression and endocrine disruption and fertility problems, or you have microplastics and plastic pollution. So 8 to 14 tons are entering the ocean every year. And then you have this PDV, distemper virus, which tends to pop up with common seals every few years, and that will wipe out a percentage of their population. And then you have the entanglement and bycatch issues, where every year several thousand gray seals die in the UK and Ireland due to that. So it's really, really tough for them. There's so many threats that are out there, and the gray seals alone, they have a 15% mortality rate just under the first 3 weeks of their life. And then in the next 18 months, when they're learning how to forage on their own and they're examining their landscape and they're trying to find the safe areas to haul out, unfortunately by trial and error, that mortality rate jumps up 40 to 60%. So you're talking about 75% mortality rate before their second birthday in a really bad year. It's shocking. It's shocking. This information came to me from Sue Sayer, who is the director of the Cornwall Seal Trust, and also the UK Joint Nature Conservancy Council. So, you imagine having to deal with all of these threats, and then the second that you get some rest or you're able to feed your pup, a human wants to interrupt you for a selfie. That's tough. So I think it's really important that we need to respect these guys, because life isn't easy for them. And the last thing that we need to do is to make it more difficult. I think the key things here is public awareness. We need stronger legislation. And it's really just comes down to respect as well. We need to start holding ourselves accountable. As much as we want to get that selfie and we want to get up close and kind of examine them, and they're so cute, and which I totally understand. These moments can be super magical. I loved every encounter I ever had, but those encounters were by chance. I didn't chase them. I didn't seek out those encounters. I know Freddie was a bit of a different situation because of where he was. Typically they would stay away from us, and we need to respect their reason why, because they need their privacy. And really, if we love them, we just need to honor that, because if we want them to come back, then we need to provide a safe, comfortable living landscape for them. I've said this before, but I really don't want yesterday's news to make tomorrow's headlines. It's very easy for things to happen, events in life or in the news, and it affects people greatly for a little while, and then they quickly forget about it, and then it's on to the next thing. And it's really, really important for that to not be the case here, because history will repeat itself.
Thank you so much, Mary. That I'm sure that it can't have been an easy event to reflect on. So thank you very much for talking about it here with me today and for the work that you're doing to protect our seals.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for allowing me to share it.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Talk of the Thames. We are delighted to see our download numbers creep up, so thank you so much to everyone that tunes in every month to hear our amazing guest speakers. We'll be back next month with a brand new episode, so please do subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified every time we release a new episode. But until next month, take care, bye-bye.